Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Feeding Your Leadership Pipeline, How to Develop the Next Generation of Leaders, hosted by HRDQ-U and presented by Daniel Tobin. Today's webinar will last around 1 hour. If you have any questions, you can always type them into the questions box. We will be answering questions as they come in live at the end of the presentation or as a follow-up by email. My name is Sarah Schaefer, and I will moderate today's webinar. With more than 30 years of experience in the learning and development field, author Dan Tobin has served as a training director in several high-tech companies and as a vice president of program design and development for the American Management Association. As a consultant and speaker, he has given workshops and keynotes on 5 continents and has consulted to HR and training groups around the world, as well as an accomplished author. Welcome, Dan, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome to everyone. Good afternoon if you're, or good morning, depending on where you are. Several years ago, I interviewed the head of power generation, which was the largest division of a mid-sized electric utility. And during the interview, he said to me that 9 of the top 11 people in his business unit, including himself, were eligible to retire in the next 3 years. And then he said, I have no idea who's going to replace them. Many companies find themselves in this predicament. They're facing a lot of retirement, especially of baby boomers, and they've done nothing to build their leadership pipeline, to prepare for the next generation of leadership. And that's what this seminar and this model are all about. I asked him, I said, have you thought about building a leadership development program? What have you been doing to develop your next generation of leaders? And he got rather testy. He said, I sent one bright young guy to a very expensive leadership program at one of the better known vendors of leadership programs. He says, it cost me a small fortune. Nothing changed. It was a total waste. Well, I happen to know this program. I sent several people to it over the years. It's an excellent program. So I went to talk with the young guy, and I asked him about the program. And he said, you know, it was a really great program. He says, I learned a lot. I changed a lot. He says, then I got back here. He says, I went to see my boss. He said, go catch up on your work. Then, once I caught up on it, I went to him and I offered a few ideas I developed during the program. He said, everything's working fine. There's no need to change anything. Get back to work. He was totally frustrated. No wonder nothing changed. Nothing was open to change. So let me start off with a poll. What has your company done? What steps has your company taken thus far to build your leadership pipeline? Have you, A, identified high potential employees, B, developed succession plans for key positions, C, have you sent candidates to external leadership development programs, or D, have you instituted an internal leadership development program? So let's take a few minutes and let's see what people have done. You should be able to answer more than one. Oh, so here's the poll. Well, I'm seeing that just about half of you have instituted an internal leadership development program, and that's great. The numbers for A, B, and C identifying your high potential employees, only about 20%. So let me share that with you. About whoops. Sarah, I'm sorry, I seem to have lost the screen here.
Yeah, no problem. I can go ahead and read those out. It looks like 20% said A, 14%.
Right, I can see that, Sarah, but I don't have a slide up or anything else.
Oh, okay, let's go ahead and do this. Can you see the slide now?
Yes.
All right, perfect.
Okay.
Can you see the results?
So 20% have identified high potential employees. About 14% have developed succession plans for key positions. 17% have sent people to external leadership programs, and just about half have instituted an internal leadership development program. I guess my question for you, which I won't ask you to answer right now, is if you've instituted an internal leadership development program, who's in it if only 20% of you have identified your high potentials? So let's move on. More than half a century ago, a man named Lawrence J. Peter wrote a book called The Peter Principle. And it's a very interesting book. If you've never seen it, I recommend it. It's still available. The Peter Principle states that in a hierarchy, every employee tends to rise to his level of incompetence. Well, you know, that sounds pretty discouraging. But if you think about it, it's true. If we have somebody who comes in as an individual contributor, we may promote that person if they have done a very good job. Okay? And if after the promotion they continue to do a very good job, we may promote them again. And if in the new position they do a great job, we promote them again. And we keep promoting them until they don't do such a great job. And they tend to get stuck in the position that where they're not performing well. Very few companies would offer that kind of person an opportunity to go back to the level below where they were doing a good job. Now, the solution to the Peter Principle is that we have to prepare people. We have to prepare them for each promotion. And that's the whole idea of building a leadership pipeline. Now, there's one company over the last 30, 40 years that has been highlighted as having probably the best leadership development approach of any company in the country, perhaps in the world. They've grown all of their CEOs themselves, and many of the people who didn't make it to the CEO level in their company became CEOs of other companies. Anybody want to guess what the company is? Well, the company is General Electric. Okay, that they have always grown their own CEOs. They've always promoted the next CEO from within their own ranks. And there are many, many other Fortune 500 companies whose CEOs graduated from the General Electric Leadership School. Now, General Electric has probably invested more in leadership development than any other company that I know of. They have this beautiful leadership development center up in Crotonville, New York, not far from where I live. And managers at all levels go to programs there 1 or more weeks a year. When Jack Welch was the CEO of General Electric, he used to teach in those programs and talk about a commitment of the CEO to leadership development He was scheduled over his career as CEO to teach in those programs more than 500 times. And he only missed one session. And the one session he missed was because he was having heart bypass surgery in Boston. So the smaller mid-sized companies, you have the problem of not having the large leadership development staffs or budgets that a GE would have. You don't have a leadership development center like GE's Crotonville. But you do still have an immediate need to develop the next generation of leaders. So let's look at how we generate leaders. How do we get people the skills, the knowledge, the wisdom that they need in order to become leaders, not just the CEO of the company, but remember that every business unit, every functional area needs leaders. Whether it's a business unit, whether it's the sales function, the engineering function, the HR function, the IS function within your company, they all need leaders. So the 4 stages of learning is a model that's been around for a long time, and let me just spend a minute going through it. Stage 1 is data, and we're all inundated with data. Every email and text message we get is data. Every brochure, everything we take in with all of our senses is data, and we're all being swamped by it. Peter Drucker said that when you take data and you give it relevance and you give it purpose, it becomes information. So as people who are putting together leadership development programs, we need to make sure that whatever we're teaching people, that has relevance to their work, and then it has purpose, that it's something that they can use. To transfer information into knowledge, you have to use it. Okay? I can read books about how to ride a bicycle. I can watch videos and watch other people do it. Okay? But I can't say that I know how to ride a bicycle until I get onto a bicycle and actually demonstrate that skill. And then the 4th stage, which is what we always want in our leaders, is wisdom. And wisdom comes from experience, intuition, experimentation. You can't teach wisdom, but wisdom can be passed on through dialogue and demonstration. So let's look how we build this model into a leadership development program. Okay, we start off learning. We put together education sessions for our high potentials. And remember, in those education sessions, we want to make sure we're giving them information, giving them things that are relevant to their work, relevant to the company's needs, okay, and for which they have a purpose. By having a purpose, I mean it's something they can turn around and use. That leads to the 2nd stage, which is application. For every education session you put together, I recommend that you have action learning projects. These can be individual or group projects. We'll talk about them more in a couple of minutes. But it gives the people an opportunity to immediately start applying what they've learned. And by applying what they've learned, you're turning it into their personal knowledge. And then reflection. Reflection is part of what creates wisdom. We ask people to, at the end of each of their action learning projects, to debrief what it is they did, report on what they did, report on obstacles they met and overcame or didn't overcome, okay, and talk about what they learned in the projects. So these are the 4 basic elements of the model. we have formal education programs, okay? In the model that I put together when I first developed this was a series of 2 to 3 day workshops done in person, okay? We brought all of the participants together, and that's an important part of this, okay? It wasn't done over the web. It wasn't done as a webinar. It wasn't done as e-learning. We brought the people together for 2 to 3 days of education. At the end of the program, we assigned action learning projects to people, either as teams or as individuals, to give the people an opportunity to start applying what they learned in the program. There were 8 of these programs, 8 education programs done quarterly over a 2-year period. Okay, so there were 8 action learning projects, some team-based, some individual-based. Also, for each of the participants, we developed an individual development plan. We did a 360 evaluation on each of the high potentials in the program. From the 360 and from the discussions with them and their managers and their HR reps, we came up with an individual development plan. Now, not every topic that a given individual needs to learn is going to be part of the overall LDP. Okay, so in the individual development plans, we focused on the specific needs of each individual in the program, that talking about needs that were above and beyond what we were teaching in the program. And then the 4th element is mentoring and coaching. Okay, that we set up each of the participants with a mentor from senior management, and as needed from the individual development plans, we arrange for coaches on certain topics. So let's say you're putting together a program, you're going to have 4 or 6 or 8 education sessions. What are 1 or 2 topics you'd like to see as part of that education session? So could you answer that? Okay, I see budgeting and planning. I see business acumen, building confidence, building trust, communications and listening skills, okay, all analytics, building confidence, building accountability. Let's see what else we can see. Building next level leaders below them, help bringing up the next level. All good topics. Business strategy, communication, all good topics. Okay. In the design of the program, as I said, we have a series of instructor-led programs on the variety of 3 different kinds of topics. Leadership skills, absolutely. Business acumen. You can't have a leader who doesn't really know the business or hasn't developed an understanding of the business. And thirdly, you need execution topics. A leader may have a great vision for the company, okay, but if he doesn't know or she doesn't know how to put together a plan to achieve that vision, they're not going to be very effective. So it's a combination of those 3 types: leadership topics, business acumen, and execution topics. Your faculty may include business school professors, consultants, training vendors, and company executives. Okay, in my book, I have a whole series of questions or criteria in how to choose faculty. If you're going to use company executives, they can be very effective, but you have to make sure that they are comfortable in the role, that they're knowledgeable, that they're good instructors, and that they're going to follow through. The worst thing I ever saw was in one company where the CEO said, I'm going to teach a 3-day session for the leadership development program, showed up the first day, and at the end of the first day said, I've got an emergency, I've got to leave, and called off the rest of the program. Well, what kind of message does that give to the participants? Selecting topics. You want topics that are needed by the participants and that focus on the specific business challenges being faced by the company. Action learning projects. Each session is followed by an action learning project. And at the beginning of the next session, in the program that I originally put together, they were quarterly programs. So 3 months later, at the beginning of the next program, the participants reported on the results of their action learning projects to a panel of executives. Now, how do you choose action learning projects? Action learning projects, you need to think about several criteria. One is they have to be things that are important but not vital to the company's health. When I first started working in the training field, I worked for a large computer company in a group called Software Services Training. And while I was in that group, we had to move offices from one building to another. And my manager, in cleaning out his files to get ready for the move, had found some meeting minutes from our quarterly meetings of the group from 5 and 6 years earlier. And we looked at those meetings, those meeting notes from 5 and 6 years earlier. We saw that there were a lot of the same issues being discussed today as had been discussed 5 or 6 years earlier. What that means is that those issues were important, or they wouldn't have been brought up at the meetings, but they weren't urgent. They weren't urgent enough or vital enough to really get the attention of the management of the group, so they would assign somebody to solve the problem. Well, those are perfect kinds of projects to give to your high potentials as part of this, as part of their action learning. Because if they can come up with a solution to the problem, all the better. They'll solve an important company problem. And if they don't, you're no worse off than you were before. So you can help solve some long-standing company challenges through the action learning projects. The individual development plans, that's the third element. We conducted a 360 assessment on each participant. We developed an individual development plan for each participant. And when we looked at the overall results for all of the participants, it suggested some ideas for future sessions in the program. Coaching and mentoring. A lot of people use those terms interchangeably. I make a distinction between coaching and mentoring. Coaching focuses on job-related skills and competencies. It's to help people develop the knowledge or skill they need to do some part of their job. Mentoring, on the other hand, focuses on company history and culture, knowledge of the industry, and career paths. I remember when I published my first book, my publisher told me about a that when he had started off as a junior editor at a major publishing house, he had been assigned a mentor who was a senior vice president of the company who'd been in the industry for 25 or 30 years. And he said they had lunch once a month. And he said during those 12 lunches he had with the man, he learned more about the industry, about how the company worked, about the culture of the company and the industry, and about what he could plan for a career path than he could have done on his own in 5 to 10 years. So that's what mentoring really focuses on. Okay? Everybody in the program could use a mentor. Coaching, it depends on what the topic is, whether it's part of the program or whether it's something else that each individual needs to work on in addition to the program. So, one more poll. Does your company have a formal mentoring program, a formal coaching program, both coaching and mentoring programs, or neither one? Okay, let me share the results here. Formal mentoring program, 18%. Coaching program, only 10%. Both coaching and mentoring, 20%. So that means that 30% have coaching and 38% have mentoring, and neither is 51%. Not uncommon, okay, but something you might think about, with or without a leadership development program. With or without the leadership development program. Okay, so what are the priorities? Let's say you don't, that you really don't have the time or the resources to do all 4 of these things. Well, the key to me is the combination of the education programs and the action learning projects. That's where the real learning takes place. That's where the real synergies can be found. So if you have to start somewhere, I'd start with a combination of those 2. Now, a lot of people want to know what's the role of executives in your learning, your leadership development program. Well, there are a number of roles they can play. They can select the participants. Okay, how do you identify high potentials? In most companies, if you have good HR business partners and good executives in the various business units and functions, they can probably sit down as a pair of people and identify who are the high potential people within the division or the function. So definitely there's a role for them to play in the selection of participants for your LDP. Secondly, selecting topics for education sessions and or the action learning projects. Okay, ask them what they think people need. It may vary from company to company. Ask them if the group of high potentials were developed to develop a set of one skill or a set of several skills, what skills would you recommend that you think could really make a difference in the future of the company? Third, they could teach or co-teach some of the education sessions. Again, make sure that if they're going to teach, that they're good teachers, that they'll make the commitment, both the commitment to prepare and the commitment to teach. I generally have found that co-teaching with an outside consultant or business school professor can be very effective. For example, In one LDP that I put together, we did a session on finance, company corporate finance. And it was, budgeting and reading balance sheets and income statements. And we had a simulation that this professor brought in. It was very effective for a day and a half in teaching the vocabulary. But then the CFO came in and started talking about what do these numbers mean for the company? How does our company compare to other companies based on these kinds of measures? What are the key measures that you as participants can affect? It was very, very effective. The fourth way they can participate is by giving after dinner presentations and holding discussions with the participants. In the company where I first developed this, we got a new CEO just after the program was announced. And he was very busy and he didn't show up for the first two sessions. But finally we got him to the third session. And what I said to him is, I said, what I'd like you to do is come in and spend 15 to 20 minutes talking about your own leadership journey. How did you get to where you are? And then I'd like you to open it up to any and all questions that the participants have for you. And he said, well, how long will that go? And I said, it should go as long as there are more questions. Well, we happen to be holding this session at Cambridge University in the UK. And we were in this beautiful dining hall that dated back to the 15th century. And we had this very formal dinner. And after the dinner was over, the CEO got up and he spent his 20 minutes talking about his leadership journey. And then he opened it up for questions. Well, about 11 p.m., the dining manager for the university came in and said that we really couldn't stay there anymore because they had to, clean up the room and get it ready for the next day's session. So our CEO said, well, where can we go? And it was during the summer. He says, well, we have the student pub right next door. It's normally closed, but I'll have somebody open it up for you. So they went into the pub, and they cracked a barrel of ale, and about 1 o'clock in the morning, the university person came in and said, we really need to close up for the night. And the CEO said, let me pay you for the rest of the barrel of ale, and we'll lock up when we're done. And the session went to 3:30 in the morning. And everyone, including the CEO, thought it was the best session that they've ever had. And the CEO, who hadn't been able to find time to attend either of the first two sessions, never missed another session for the length of the program. Another way you can involve the executives, having them sit on evaluation panels for the action learning projects. Okay? You're going to get to see a lot of people who aren't normally in their range of vision. For most executives in most companies, their view of company personnel is usually limited mostly to their own division or function and only goes down 1 or 2 levels. By sitting on these evaluation panels, you're going to get to see a lot more of the talent across the organization. And then finally, they can act as coaches and mentors. Okay, so let me tell you about the first time I put this model together. I'd been hired into a high-tech company of about 1,600 employees. The company hadn't been doing well. There had been several rounds of layoffs. There have been salary reductions and forced furloughs. Attrition was more than 15% a year. When I originally interviewed with the Senior Vice President of Human Resources, who was my boss, putting together this leadership development program was the first priority. But when I arrived to start the job, she said, you know, it's really not the right time to do this. And every few months I'd ask her about it, and it was never the right time to do this. And about 18 months into my being there, she called me in on one Thursday afternoon and said, you know, we really have to put together this program. I said, fine, I'll put together a plan for you. Well, the next morning, I handed her a 10-page plan, which is essentially what this model is. And she looked through it and she said, this is terrific. How'd you get it done so fast? And I said, well, you have to realize I've been working on it for 15 years. You know, it's the model is based on my own experience, as well as dozens of companies around the world with which I've done consulting or collected data or visited for the books I've written. So we started the program. We had 36 mid-level managers who'd been identified as having high potential for future leadership roles in the company. Starting with the first session, the feedback we were getting from the participants were, you know, the education session was terrific, but just by bringing these 36 people together from all the different business units and functions from all the geographies around the world, it would have been worth the company's investment just to have us sit and talk with each other for 3 days without even having an education session. The other reaction of the participants was many of them said, you know, the company hasn't been doing well. I've had my resume out on the street, been thinking about leaving, but if the company's going to invest in my future here, I'm going to stick around. And at the end of the 2-year program, we had 35 of the 36 people still with the company. Okay, and the one who actually left after the first session because he said that he had some family problems that he was dealing with, that he just couldn't devote the time to the program that he thought was going to be needed, and please, when we run the program again, include him. So let's talk about what results, what kinds of expectations you can set for your leadership development programs. Number one, and probably the most obvious one, is that the participants will develop the leadership skills, business acumen, and execution skills they need for future leadership roles in your company. Number two, you'll expand your company's pool of talent for use in succession planning. And remember that succession planning, many companies say, yeah, we've got succession plans in place for our CEO or for each of the C-level officers. Well, you absolutely need those, but you also need leadership in your functional areas, in your business units, and you need a pool of talent so that you have people who are ready when a vacancy occurs. Number three, you'll retain some top talent you might otherwise have lost. That certainly was the case in the company where I started this program. Number four, through action learning projects, you'll solve some long-standing company challenges. Number five, you'll make your top talent more visible to company executives. As I said, most executives in a large, middle to large size company have little view of their employees beyond their own business units or functional areas, down 1 or 2 levels. Well, this makes your top talent more visible across functions, across geographies. Number 6, LDP participants will improve their performance in their current jobs. We expect them to apply what they're learning not just in a future role, not just in the action learning projects, but in their current jobs. And we've seen some great results from it. Number 7 is an often overlooked one that I think is very important. You'll weed out some high potentials who fail to perform in the LDP. In every company I've worked for, there's been at least one example where a senior level person in the company leaves for whatever reason. And the CEO says, you know, there's this really bright young guy or gal that just did this terrific project with great results over in this business unit. I'm going to promote that person. And they go ahead and they promote the person, and when that person comes into the new job, they're so full of themselves that they come in with all the answers, well, without asking any questions. And they so alienate the current staff that several key senior people in that function or business unit end up leaving the company. And 12 or 18 months later, after this business unit has had a dramatic drop in results, the CEO has little choice but to get rid of that person. Through the LDP, through the action learning projects, you get to weed out some people who won't make great leaders before you promote them. And number 8, you'll help company executives feel more connected to many parts of the business. I told you about the CEO spending till 3:30 in the morning with the participants, just in dialogue. He certainly felt more connected with what was happening in the company than he had in the 6 months that he'd been in that position. And every executive that I had come in and do a similar after-dinner presentation and then Q&A session gave us the same feedback. They never felt more connected to parts of the business than they had after this session. So I think these are all reasonable expectations for a program. So what are the steps in implementing the program? First, you need to identify your high potentials. Second, choose your program design. Okay? The program I had put together was 8 sessions over 2 years. I suggest you need at least 4 sessions, maybe 6, maybe 8. I think quarterly is the right time period to keep the momentum going. Select the topics. Remember, leadership topics as well as building business acumen as well as execution skills. Set up a mentoring program. Find coaches for those people who need them. Write your individual development plans for each participant. Get your company executives involved in the program. And of course, we want to do it all on a modest budget. Now, in the book, we've got higher and lower cost alternatives. For example, I'll just give you one example. Leadership skills. Well, you can go out and get one of the top name gurus in the leadership field to come in and do a session for your people. Might cost you $25,000 to $50,000 to do that. But if you go to the same business schools where those people work, you'll find some young assistant professors who have experience in the school's executive education programs, okay, who are great presenters, know their stuff, or they wouldn't have been appointed to that school, but they cost a whole lot less. 30 years ago, I hired a brand new assistant professor to help with a program out of Harvard Business School. Guy was terrific. His name was Nitin Noria. Okay, young assistant professor, had been there for 1 year. Did a great job on the program. Today, he's the dean of the school. Okay, if I were to try and hire him today, I wouldn't get him for $1,500 a day. It would be more like $15,000 or $20,000 a day. Thing to remember is the total cost of your leadership development program will be less than making a single poor promotional decision. A poor promotional decision can cost the company millions of dollars. Basic question for your CEO, what's the cost to your company of not developing the next generation of leaders? Okay, now, there are other ways besides the model that I present, okay, of helping to develop leaders. Some people send their key high potential employees to an external leadership development program, like the business unit head from the electric company. In a minute, I'll talk to you about if you're going to do that, how you can make sure you get a return on your investment. Another model that's fairly popular is to have your company work with a business school or other leadership development vendor to provide an intensive week-long program where, you know, on day one they do finance, on day two they do marketing, on day three they do operations management, and so on and so on. The problem with that is you're jamming too much into 1 week and you're not giving people the opportunity to start applying what they learned to turn all that information into knowledge. Many companies say, let the cream rise to the top. We're not going to do anything. The real leaders are going to emerge. We don't have to do anything, you know, other than do good hiring and hire lots of people till we see who rises to the top. And then finally, hiring leadership talent from the outside. You know, if you don't have the talent inside, you're going to end up going outside. And that can be costly as well. So let's say you're going to send an employee to an external program. Well, the problem with the electric company was they never assessed what the employee's learning needs were. And if you don't know what the needs are, you can't find the appropriate program. Third, you need to set expectations with the employee before they go to the program. What do we expect you to learn? How do we expect you to apply that learning once you get back? At the end of the program, when they come back, you can't, as they did with this in this electric company, just say, okay, go catch up on your work. You need to brief them about what they learned, how they changed, what they wanted to do, and then set up goals and the reporting mechanism for the employee. And finally, and most importantly, follow through on those goals. So, Sarah, let's turn it over for some Q&A.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. And yes, we do have a little bit of time for that Q&A. So attendees, why don't you go ahead and send me those questions right now. And while we wait for some of those questions to filter in, let me share a little bit on how you can keep in touch. Dan's contact information is on that slide listed right there. And then also, if you would like to check out his book, you can do so on nextgenerationofleaders.com and as well as amazon.com. And then for us, if you want to connect with us, we are on all the regular social media channels. And don't forget to sign up for our weekly webinar Wednesdays at HRDQ-U.com. All right, perfect. And we do have a number of questions coming in. So looks like our first question is coming from Brian. What subjects should be included in a leadership development program?
Okay, well, we had, you know, a number of suggestions, and they were all good suggestions. Certainly, you need to focus on leadership skills. Leadership skills can include things like how to create a vision and sell that vision. One of the most important set of skills that research has shown that great leaders have is emotional intelligence. And there are certainly a bunch of good emotional intelligence speakers and programs out there that you can bring in. Okay, so you get leadership skills. Secondly, building business acumen. There are a number of very good simulations. If you want to send me an email, I'd be happy to refer you to some companies that have some really excellent computer-based and game-based simulations that can really help people understand the larger picture than just the function or the business unit that they're in. And then third, execution skills. Execution skills can be project management or program management. It can be certainly financial analysis and budgeting, communication skills, strategic planning, all of those topics. In the book, I have an appendix with a dozen different topics and just an outline of what those topics would be, could be, and what kinds of action learning projects you could assign for each one of those topics.
All right, great. Thank you. Looks like our next question is coming from Iman. How can I develop myself to be a leader?
Well, there are several things you can do. I mean, you can get yourself educated on each of those three areas: the leadership skills, the execution skills, and the business acumen. Okay, for business acumen, you know, be curious beyond your own job. Find out, you know, how does your job fit into the big picture of what the company is doing? You know, who is your customer? Who takes the work that you do and then has to work with that? Okay. Execution skills, you know, learn from your mistakes. Ask your manager for coaching. If you see somebody who has a set of skills that, you know, they're really good at this, and I wish I was that good, well, ask them how they develop those skills. But the point of this program is for the company to plan to develop their high potentials rather than you as an individual. Look at, you know, as an individual, look at work by people like David Ulrich and Jim Kouzes. They've got some excellent books and some workbooks for individuals on how to become a leader.
All right, perfect. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, looks like our next one is coming from Elaine. Can you mix a variety of levels of employees in an LDP?
You can, but it probably, I recommend that it can be most effective when you get people from the same level. The reason being that they're working on the same kinds of problems if they're in the same level. One thing you absolutely want to avoid is you want to avoid having an employee and his or her manager being in the same program, because that really makes them hesitant to really talk about issues that they're having. Okay, because they're afraid to expose weaknesses or talk about conflicts that they're having with the other person.
Okay, perfect. And it looks like our next question is coming from Chad. Why do hypos need an individual development plan in addition to the leadership development program?
Okay, the individual development plans, every individual is different. Okay, and each one may have some needs that other people in the program don't have. You know, for example, someone may be a poor presenter, and you really want to work with them on presentation skills. Just as, you know, as one example. Another person may have some interpersonal conflict skills. Um, I just saw something the other day where a young woman employee is interviewing for a job, and the HR manager asks her what her greatest weakness is, and she says, "My honesty." And the HR manager says, "I don't consider honesty a weakness." And she says, "Well, to be honest with you, I don't give a damn what you think." Well, that person has some work to do, maybe not in terms of honesty, but in terms of tact. Okay, and hopefully not all of the participants in your program are going to have that same problem. So the IDP is there to take care of a special problem that a participant is having that's outside the scope of the program.
All right, great. Thank you. And it looks like we probably just have time for one more question. And this question is coming from Beth. What roles can company executives play in the company's leadership development program, and how do you get them to participate?
Okay, well, I think that there was a whole list of roles that they could play. I think the most important thing is to get a champion. You know, if you can get the CEO to say this is important, or even the head of one business unit who really recognizes the importance of doing this, they will help convince their peers.
Okay. Just want to get in one more question then?
Sure, and let's just remind people that if they're asking questions that we don't have time to answer, that I will answer them in writing after the program.
Yep, perfect. So I guess we have 2 more minutes. Just want to add any final thoughts, and then I'll go ahead and wrap up the session then.
Okay, well, I hope that you've learned something about the LDP model that I've developed here. If you see in the handout the slide from Jim Kouzes, who's one of the gurus of leadership development, he was very kind in saying how comprehensive he found this book, even though it's a relatively short book of just under 200 pages. And if there's any way I can help you, you have my contact information. And as I said, any questions that are left after we end, I will be answering in writing, and Sarah at HRDQ will be sending out to all the participants. And thank you for attending.
All right, yes, Dan, thank you so much. And again, we will be sending those questions out that Dan answers. You'll probably receive those probably like mid-next week. So we appreciate your time, and we hope you found today's webinar informative. Thank you.